Time I'll turn it over to our City Administrator, Rebecca Grill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a few items that we wanted to go over with you and then just be present in case you had any questions. I don't know if you wanted to start with a kind of a situation report from the Health Department.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Do have a hand up? You're with me. You've been sanitized.
Thank you.
We are practicing social distancing as much as we can.
You. Thank you, sir.
So it might be easiest for me just to go to some of my notes over here. And I'll speak as loud as I can. What is in front of you is really just a snapshot of what's kind of transpired to this point from essentially the past 3 weeks when we really kind of started this case monitoring to today. So as you have in front of you, there's a COVID-19, or otherwise known as coronavirus, situational awareness report. With me is Ashley Palin. She's actually our deputy administrator, but also is serving as a deputy incident commander for the health department. Things that we've been doing with regard to current activity within the health department on COVID-19, as we drop down to slide number 2, is had numerous discussions with a number of different entities and individuals within the city of West Dallas, but as well some of our national and state partners, to include a meeting directly with leadership from the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, in particular to help them actually hold their emergency operation plan, which is critical to their assurance that they're effectively able to respond to an incident should something come up. So in the course of our conversation with them, they very quickly did update their EOP to look at different tiers as far as prepping for a scenario, and then also should the school close. They did share a copy of that with us before they actually finalized that, seeking our input. We've also met with Aurora Healthcare System. A little bit of time it took for us to get them at the table, but that meeting in face actually happened with them and their leadership this week. So we talk about our respective plans and then talk a little bit about what we are both doing as healthcare providers to assure that we're effectively monitoring the situation, and then also doing what we can to effectively respond to any of these cases that come up. Of course, we've had close contact with the Senior Center, and as a result of that, in large part because of the sheer fact that they are really our most vulnerable population when we look at mortality rates, decision was to, in effect, close them down. However, they are still serving meals essentially in takeout form. The county area disability and resource center is actually working on their own plans to kind of figure out what a potential backup plan is should we no longer be able to serve takeout meals, how we can begin to actually provide meals to these seniors in their homes. Certain strategies might involve actually getting Meals on Wheels involved in that process. One thing that I did discover actually as we reviewed the essentially the permissible uses of CDBG funds, there is a stipulation in those funds that that would support the ability to deliver meals with the use of those funds. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. We don't want our folks to go hungry. We've had repeated meetings with executive lead and department staff routinely. We have outreach to our long-term care facilities to assure that they're aware of the guidelines that the CDC is pushing out, as well as Department of Health Services, and then offering our services should they need them. Things along the lines of, are they restricting visitors? You know, we're asking those basic questions. All are to this point. We've outreached to the faith-based community to talk a little bit about kind of what their preparation plans are given their populations, and giving them assurance that we're there to support them, but as well strategize with them if they've got constituents who are reliant on them for food, and so helping them to identify some resources. And then of course, repeatedly daily, in interaction with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, the CDC, and our other local and regional health department experts. So that's a quick snapshot of just the array of partners and constituents that we really interact with on a daily basis, and more so repeatedly on a daily basis. Here's a quick snapshot as we know it with regard to current West Allis closures. The West Allis, West Milwaukee School District is closed. The West Allis Senior Center is effectively closed. The West Allis Library has been closed. And then, as you're, I'm sure, all well aware, there are many voluntary community cancellations that have happened. I was able to establish contact with the executive director of the State Fair Park with regard to some of their activities. And she gave me assurance that they are well aware of obviously what's going on and supportive of suspending, postponing, canceling activities there until further notice. But she did essentially say for us to maintain an open line of communication with them. Dropping down, Wisconsin Department of Health Services recommendations and/or state orders. As of 3/16, so as of yesterday, the governor issued an executive order to prohibit gatherings of 50 people or more statewide. And then as of today, at 5 o'clock, the governor issued emergency order number 5, which prohibits gatherings of 10 or more in a location. At 5 o'clock p.m. today, all bars and restaurants shall close in the state of Wisconsin. The note on that, though, is that restaurants may remain open for takeout or delivery service only. Okay. In other news, CDC and White House recommendations as of 3/15, what President Trump pushed out is 15 days to slow the spread. All U.S. events of 10 plus people should be canceled or held virtually. And then for organizations that serve people who are at higher risk of serious COVID illness, to cancel events or groups of 10 or more people. So kind of the trickle-down effect. We're getting some advice, direction from the feds that ultimately may not be as quick as we want to see in the state, but we are seeing some impact in compliance with what the feds are beginning to recommend. On the next page, what we have here is our current case status in the jurisdiction of West Allis. We do have 2 confirmed positive cases as of today. 1 came in today. We have 20 negative cases, 18 pending, and then we have 7 who are under 14-day symptomatic monitoring at this point. So that's all I have at this point as far as a report. But any questions you want to take at this point? We can.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Riddle?
Gail has some more insight into the governor's order, so I don't know if you wanted to let
Absolutely.
him go into that, and that might clear up any questions.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, the order came out this afternoon, effective 5 o'clock this evening. So I'll go over the highlights of that order. It was issued as an emergency order on top of Executive Order 72, which doesn't have a deadline but declared an emergency for public health within the state. Some of the big high points, number one, is that bars must remain closed. Now, in this order, it doesn't define what a bar is. I don't know. Anyway,
You crack things up,
Oh,
I'll try it again, maybe, or, all right. Well, we'll see how long this goes. So like I said, the word bar not defined in the order, nor is it used in state law, so it really wasn't helpful guidance on what a bar is compared to what's not a bar. So I've left them to interpret what that means. What it means and what I've advised the police department to enforce is that a bar is anything that has a Class B license, but is not one of the, quote, other businesses listed that would be associated with an alcohol license. Since those are the only things that can be issued with the Class B license as another use, if they don't have any of those, either they are operating illegally or they are just alcohol service only. That's my logic as to why that's a bar. So you've got restaurants, hotels, bowling alleys, movie theaters, they're all okay. They can continue to be open. They don't have to lock their doors. However, they do have to comply with the 10-person limit, which, by the way, is actually a 9-person limit. 10 or above would be in violation of that order, so 9 or below is in compliance. Also, the question is, what's a restaurant? Also not defined in the order. So, again, assuming it's coming from a state person, especially the health department also licenses restaurants and uses that term in a specific way. So, the idea would be that anyone who's got a license to operate as a restaurant is a restaurant, no matter what else they do. So, if you are, the example today was Polly's on Greenfield that came up. They clearly are a restaurant. They serve food. They have a grill. They also, though, have a Class B license. They serve alcohol. They can at least remain open to the extent of carry-out and takeout. And also, it's not, people aren't aware, a Class B license allows the sale face-to-face of alcohol in closed containers for carry-out. In West Dallas, local ordinances allow beer between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., but actually allow closed containers of wine from 6 a.m. to midnight daily. So if you're a restaurant that has an alcohol license, you can't have people in the business with open containers. You can't serve people with food in the place, but you can serve carry-out, and you can also serve closed containers of alcohol within those time limits. Restaurants do have those special rules, so that's really it. If people are coming in, they got to stay 6 feet apart. 10 people total, or 9 people total, technically within the establishment, including employees. There are no shopping malls. There are no shopping malls in West Dallas, so that's not an issue. Schools have to be closed, but it's specific to instructional and extracurricular activities related to the school. So other things like medication pickup, childcare services, meal pickup, or operating as a polling place, all that is allowed. And then just the general rule of 9 people at most in a specific area. That's an enclosed area, so it has to be within a room or a confined space, such as this. However, there is an exception for government buildings as well as a lot of other exceptions. I have instructed the police department on what those exceptions are. I could list them if you want, otherwise I can stand for questions as well.
anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chair, I have one for Cale and one for Bob. For Cale, so these people limits only refer to interior spaces. So if you have an outdoor patio or what we might call a beer garden,
If you have an outdoor area like that, it's not a confined space. The order was limited to confined spaces. But you still are going to have to be subject to that 6-foot rule. So I imagine if you have an outdoor event scheduled, it's going to be very awkward when everyone is standing 6 to 10 feet apart from each other.
Okay.
It could be theoretically done. It's just, it's going to be very awkward to operate.
okay. And then for Bob, one of the questions that was brought to me today was on assisted living centers. They've gone to a no visitor policy, essentially. And I know that in the past, some of these assisted living centers have had a challenge hiring enough staff. And oftentimes it's the visiting family members who might be noticing problems. And now with the no visiting, I mean, are we sending staff in to check to make sure that everything's running smoothly, maybe talking to residents? Is that something we have the capability to do and the staff to do?
Right. I mean, they still have the ability to maintain their staff, right? And so should they get at a point where they don't have that capacity, then that's where we maintain that open line of communication, and we can actually send in nurses if we need to.
Well, it's not just the nursing staff. I'm thinking like, I know some of them are having a problem feeling like, well, remember 3 weeks ago when everybody was hiring? Yeah, yes, or housekeeping, or, I just want to make sure that we're not letting any of these problems go unnoticed.
Right, no, and that's
Okay.
part of our due diligence when we talk to them, is just to kind of get a sense of how they're operating, what their deficiencies are, and really, for us, we just, as a primary mission, want to make sure that as special populations, vulnerable populations, that they're going to get the services that they need. There are resources that are available, not even just in the region, but the state, that we can call on when let's hope it's not a when, but if, we have to start asking those questions. Within the state, there are a number of what's called health emergency readiness coalitions. So we are part of that within the Southeast region. HERC, Health Emergency Readiness Coalition, is essentially represented by public health, hospitals, emergency, fire, police. And so that's a great resource for us as a partner in a HERC to actually tap into that as a resource, should we need to. And,
So if a citizen has a complaint, they could call one of the aldermen, or they could obviously contact the health department directly, and they could remain anonymous, and that if they had a concern about a friend, relative, loved one in,
assisted living.
okay, yes.
Facility? I think, let's keep us informed.
Okay.
It would be no different than if we, did what we do now, with regard to a resident. If that resident has a complaint about anything,
Yes,
So,
okay.
yeah, those are things that we follow up on.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Attorney Decker?
Sure. Just one point to clarify too, one of the exceptions is retail locations. You use the language in the order just so that anyone who's watching is aware of it, but it's essentially a retail location in which you can that's an exception to that 9-person rule, so like the Home Depot or wherever else. If you're in a place in which you can generally maintain a 6-foot or arm's length proximity away from people, and you're never within arm's length for more than 10 minutes, then those type of retail establishments can also be open and allow more than 9 people in those establishments. Again, enforceability aside, that's what the rule is, so just want to make sure that's clear as well.
Okay, thank you.
We have a few other department-specific topics. One of them is from the clerk's office regarding polling places. You have a handout of a map and then an email that Steve has sent to me.
So based on the questions I've received from some of you, as of today, the election is still going on. It's one of the top 7 critical infrastructures according to the federal government. So this needs to happen. Whether or not things change, I don't know. As we all know, all this stuff is happening on a daily basis. We are facing poll worker shortages. I'm in the process of trying to recruit younger people. I reached out to the school. I haven't heard back yet. I'll be reaching out to the colleges. I asked you guys to do the same. Help me reach out to people. Anybody. There's going to be a lot of bartenders that are probably going to need some work. Anybody and everybody can help. Before I get into the polling sites, let's see a couple other factors. All right. As you know, we've already talked about moving a couple of the polling sites, that being Village of Manor Park and Heritage, because they are in nursing facilities. Because of the shortage of poll workers, I may need to consolidate even further. One of the big things that's coming up is doing we're pushing mail-in absentee ballots, and the word got out. I'm getting bombarded with them. I've got between Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I got over 700 requests, and Sunday, Monday, and today, probably another 700. By the time it's all said and done, we may have, I'm guessing, 80% turnout for mailed-in absentee ballots, about 25,000 ballots. If this is true, most of the election day is going to be spent processing absentee ballots. So if I am able to consolidate, I'm not having a problem. I've identified on here the red circles on this map are my bigger sites. They're at least somewhat bigger. The blue sites are all of the ones that I can still use, but if I'm facing a poll worker shortage, I'll probably move them elsewhere. So I'm going to look into possibly moving a few of these sites geographically somehow. Central High School also has a gym, and if the school is not out, I could probably use the gym and probably put more people in there. Nathan Dale also has a bigger gym that I might be able to use. I still have to work all this stuff out with the school, but I'm not going to get back to that. Longfellow probably put some sites in there. So the fact is, we've got some bigger sites now that the school is not interested in using. So it's probably going to have to do. I'm also trying to get word out for more poll workers, more mail that. The state is also not working on any deadlines. So for registration of voters online is still tomorrow at 5. So, excuse me, okay. Starting tomorrow, or starting Thursday, people are going to be coming here, because the only way they're going to be able to register to vote is in person at the clerk's office. So we still got to figure out the logistics. We already have, as you probably see, a table out front, and people manning the front area. Today is still the deadline to get out absentee ballots. We've got a bunch processed already, so and we're going to be working on even more tomorrow, and probably the rest of the days, because they're going to keep coming in. So getting help with that. The other thing is we're still having, as of today, in-person absentee voting, probably early voting. That's still occurring between March 23rd and April 3rd, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. What we're gonna, can you hear me?
The unplugged one?
Thanks. All right. So we're still, we're still holding the in-person absentee voting. We're going to end up setting up, I've been using the express vote machines to do that. Oh yeah, I want to talk about Badger books too. So we're going to be, we're going to be setting those up in the lobby area, like basically right in the front entrance. And I bought a bunch of styluses, so we'll be using styluses, cleaning those, because it's difficult to clean the screens on these things without waiting 10 minutes. So I'm trying to figure all this out. Rebecca reminded me, in addition to the polling site location, the fire chief had asked me to not use Fire Station 2. So that's another one that we're looking to get out of for certain. And then we also have the Badger books. And that's already deployed at all of my multi-ward sites. So if I add more wards to there, it's, and if they're doing absentee ballots all day long, it's gonna be very easy to actually process the absentee ballots through the Badger book system. So that's not gonna be the big issue either. We're figuring out, we're following guidelines from CDC, World Health Organization on, you know, spacing, cleanliness, and all sorts of factors that go into the polling site. So that's going to be a factor in recruiting people as well. Anything else? Any questions about elections?
Mr. President?
Alderman Vitale.
Steve, I mean, you mentioned the fire station, fire chief, that's one, the city to use the fire station. You know, I did in that fire station, what is the answer, the way it's located? You know, it's, first of all, I'm okay with more of it, so there is some fire engines inside the garage, but those fire engines, it's not the problem. I love the chief, you know, but for this reason, it's very important. Out of the city, where you want the fire station, out of the city,
Alderman Vitale. The reason that they want to move it out of the fire station is because of the fact that we have first responders stationed there, and we don't want them coming in contact unnecessarily with the public. The problem is if we have a number of first responders that come into contact with someone that has the virus, they have to be quarantined for 14 days, which takes them out of service. And it means that we don't have that number of firefighters for use for 14 days, or police officers. So we have to keep them out of those buildings. We're keeping all the public out of those buildings. That's why the police station is close to the public as well.
well, like I say, I mean, I'm not you know, run the health department, I'm not thinking about medical questions, but the fact is that, you know, many people in the garage won't be, many people really, even firefighters will be there, will be, you know, inside the garage. I mean,
We don't want any around the people. We want no firefighters and no police coming into contact with citizens unless they have to because of a call. And then they're going to be protected when they do come in contact with them. So we just don't want to take any chances.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but we have other polling places which people walks in and the polling workers are there. So they could be invested with the issue that we have right now, in fairness, really. So do we not follow that? No, I don't, because then we gotta shut down all the polling places, really.
Mr. Chairman?
Unrealistic, really.
Alderman Vitale, I understand that, and we know that that's a concern. We all have that concern with the voting registrants as well. However, they are not first responders, and unfortunately, if someone gets sick, whether they're at City Hall, a Public Works employee, they can quarantine for 14 days without affecting our protective services. When you start taking firefighters or police officers off the line, that's a major issue, and I don't think we can afford to have that.
Mr. Chairman?
Alderman Barzak.
Just
The fire chief, he decided at that time, months ago, he didn't want any polling place in that location. So I know that for a fact, that's a lot. Before this happened. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, I don't like to, you know, come up with arguments, but that's the truth. You know, I mean, I don't like to waste words, really. I'm not playing games here.
I don't think we are either, Alderman Vitale.
It was brought up to us months ago. It was not something new. because
Point of order.
fires.
Point of order. I believe Alderman Barzak was called. Mr. Chair? Mr. Chairman, and the health department can back me up on this. My understanding is that in any time there's an emergency, national emergency, and there's a triage situation, immediately the fire departments become, I think, ground zero as secondary hospitals. Is that true?
Yeah, we
And-
can get them as a tier 1.
Yes, and so my understanding is part of this is in case this goes any further and it's a polling place, and all of a sudden there's a triage situation and there's an emergency epidemic, again, they are tier 1. They're going to be on the front line of being the first place where patients are going to be taken if the hospitals start to fill up.
Well, then there's also risk exposure. The virus does have a lifespan, can live on surfaces for an extended period of time. And so, unless you're prepared to actually send in a team that's going to do a thorough scouring of hard surfaces and doorknobs and any number of surfaces that are touched, you're putting those firefighters at risk. And you really are, because it does live on surfaces.
And just to continue on it, my understanding is that they would clear that station out, put the firefighters at the 2 remaining stations, and then that would become the triage center because of its location and size. All right, thank you.
Mr. President,
Alderman May.
Steve, one quick comment and a question. Just so you know, Lane also has 2 large gyms if you need to make use of that. I
Yep.
imagine the school district will not be open that day.
That occurred to me today, a little bit later when I was talking to one of my other chiefs, that they do have a bigger gym.
2
Two.
big gyms. The second thing is, are we lame ducks able to serve as polling workers outside of our own district?
Kale can correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as you are not on the ballot, you can serve as a poll worker. So if we have an area where you're not on that particular ballot, yes, you can. Because of the mixing and matching, I just got to watch because, I'm going to be putting probably I want to do them geographically, what makes sense geographically. So if I end up putting a couple District 3 with District 4, I just got to watch that. Once I come up with the final.
We're not on the ballot.
That's true, you're not, so yeah. But Alderman Weigel asked me the same thing earlier, so.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for City Clerk Bratz?
I did have one more comment, Mr. Chair. Unless you feel otherwise, I still do intend on sending out postcards to the affected voters. I know we're on crunch time, but I do want to get the word out. I know we're going to be social media push and media and word of mouth, but I still want to send out. It's going to be a huge expense. I just want you to understand that.
I have one comment. It happens to be the polling place that I voted at, Ward 20. It's in a temporary location behind the Beloit Road housing, and that's a very confined space. When I voted, my wife and I, there were 5 of us in a room, and it was crowded. So I think you ought to consider moving that location to someplace that's a little larger. And I would I would hope we have signs posted if we're moving any of these for the second time at all the locations saying where these people vote, because it's going to be very confusing for people who once voted at the rec department, then vote at the senior housing, and then vote wherever else you put them. So I don't want people having to run all over the city, but that may be the case.
I call that place cozy.
Yeah, it's cozy. I mean, it's a very nice facility, it's just very close.
Right. Actually, since you bring that one up, that is on the target to get moved elsewhere, mainly because it is in the middle of a retirement community. It's their clubhouse. I do know that the clubhouse is closed to the residents,
Yep.
but we just kind of want to maintain distance from that area.
I'll move.
As far as what, special voting deputies? Well, as far as the residents go, I've been in constant communication with the director over there. She's one of the more active directors of the facilities. So, the special voting deputies typically vote or bring the ballots to the voters at the residential care facilities. That's been ended by order of the state. So instead, we have to mail all of the absentee ballots to them, but I'm trying to work it out with the directors. The state is allowing us to allow them to come and pick up those ballots in bulk. They'll still be sealed, but just everything to the point of putting postage on them and mailing. So they're gonna just act as couriers, bring it to them, help them as they need to. And in fact, if we do the special voting deputies, no employee of those facilities can help with that by law. However, now that law is not in place, they're just regular absentee voters. They can actually act as assisters in this case. So that helps in that factor. We're moving that site. There'll be postcards just like everyone else. Anything else specific you wanted to know about that? Okay. And signage, we do, just so you know, if we're moving sites, we have a lot of stuff stored at these sites, so I'm gonna have to work with Public Works to go get all this equipment to bring it here. Frankly, if we had 100% turnout in mail-in absentees, we could just hold everything here and just have all the machines and plug in absentee ballots all day. Well, Kale and I will just verify what the state law says about candidates on a ballot working the polls. We believe it that you can. We just want clarification. Great. So any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
The police chief can give an update about the police operations, if that's okay?
Please.
Good afternoon. I'm going to give the update in the event that you start getting calls from citizens noticing a difference in how we're serving the public. There's been so many changes that have occurred in the last 3 to 4 days. The biggest change is that the county jail notified us late last week that they were not going to accept any misdemeanor arrest, or with rare exception, I should say. Domestic violence, they'll still accept, and repeat drunk drivers or drugged drivers, they'll still accept. So outside of that, we're left as a police department with what are we going to do with misdemeanor arrests. So the path that we have taken, the path that we have taken is we will investigate like we always do. We will not even take them back into our police station and photograph and print them. The way that we would take them into our station to print and photograph is if we cannot, with a very high degree of certainty, identify them on the scene. So for example, if you have a driver's license, we ask you probative questions. Hey, have you ever been stopped for speeding? You say, yeah, I got a ticket about a year ago. We query your driver's record. We confirm that you got a ticket about a year ago. We will do things like that to confirm who you are. If we cannot confirm who you are, then that relatively small group of people will take into the station, we'll fingerprint, we'll book, and then we will release from the station. Alderman Lysick, you hit on, the possibility of protective services getting quarantined. We have spent a ton of time talking about that and looking what that would do to our police department. In response to that, we are going to handle as many complaints as we can over the telephone. So if you are a citizen and you call, and for the past 50 years you're used to a squad car coming to your home and talking to you face to face, that may not occur anymore. It's on a case-by-case basis. Those things that we can do on the phone, we will do on the phone. And those things that we have to go and meet you in person, we'll gladly go and meet you in person. As a department, we are running very low on personal protective equipment, things like masks, and we're fine with gloves. We're running low on masks and hand sanitizer, but there is not a supply that anyone can get. I have not talked to a police department yet that has an adequate supply of those things. Hospitals do not have an adequate supply. So we have got planning underway for what are we going to do with our masks. There's been guidance from the federal government that instead of being a one-use item, they now can be used repeatedly. We're researching ways to clean the mask. We have an article today that tends to indicate that UV lighting might clean the mask. All of the departments in this state, all the departments in the country are waiting for the nationwide reserves to be opened up. The federal government took that step, but now it's the bureaucracy of how do you actually get those items, which could take a very long time for us to do. We are starting to, as I said earlier, minimize face-to-face contact between the police and the public. But even in the events where we do have to have contact with the public, let's say that we have an arrest situation. We had one over the weekend where we had 9 officers that were involved with a family, and a person in that house had all the symptoms of COVID. So if that person would have tested positive, that person did not, we would have lost those 9 police officers for 14 days. If you keep on losing chunks of 9 officers, eventually you will have no officers. In a conference call today, we're asking state officials to perhaps have 2 different types of quarantine, a quarantine for the general public and a quarantine for protective services and hospitals and places of that sort. If we all get quarantined, I don't know what that would look like in our city. Another thing that we did yesterday, or actually today, I'm losing track of my days now, we closed the police station to business from the public. Emergencies are still obviously allowed to come into the station, but if you want to go into the station and buy a parking permit or pay for a fine, we're not going to let you do that. Fortunately for us, our city was forward-looking. Anything that you can do in person at the police station, you can do online. So we've got signage at the station, and we're just diverting all of the citizens to an online environment. So in summary, we're good right now. We don't have anyone that's quarantined from our department. I suspect that that will change at some point in the near future, but we'll keep at it, and I believe we're going to get through it by minimizing contact with the public to only those events that we have to do. A thing that we did internally, all of our detectives, we've instructed them to essentially stay in the building. If there is a crime that they have to go out and investigate, such as a crime against a child, a serious violent felony, we will go out and we will do that. But the intent of keeping the detectives in the building is that they will serve as a ready reserve. If we get to the point that a ton of uniform officers are quarantined and can't come to work, we would have a ready reserve to still get the functions of the department done. So that's essentially an update from the police department, subject to any questions that anyone here might have.
Any questions from the older persons?
Mr. President.
Alderman May.
One measure that some of the hospitals have been taking is to close off all access except to specific doors where they can monitor who's coming in, coming out, etc. Has the police department, City Hall, other buildings where there are multiple points of access, are we doing the same thing? Are we requiring people to come through one point of access?
So we really, although we have multiple doors in the police department, we don't have multiple doors that are used. The employees, I would say 95% of all employees come in through one door. All of the internal doors that can be propped open are propped open. And then obviously the 2 doors that the public comes in through, we have a double door set up in the front of the police station. So the public comes in through one door, 95% of the employees come in through a second door, and all of the internal doors are propped open. Our dispatch center has essentially quarantined themselves in dispatch. Police officers would be allowed to go in there and get teletypes that they had the dispatchers run. They have always had a mail slot that things could get passed in or out of the dispatch center. That's the only way that things are going in and out of the dispatch center. You know, we talk about police officers and what would it look like if we didn't have enough police officers. I don't know what we will do if we get an outbreak in the dispatch center, because they have a unique skill. I could not go and sit in their chair and do what they do. I don't know how to use their software, their systems, or any of that, so we've already self-quarantined the dispatch center from the rest of us in the department.
Another question I have is, and maybe this is actually more for HR. If this is more for HR, let's skip it until it comes up. But are we allowed to, but if the need came, could we keep people on for longer periods of time than 8 to 12 hours, things like that? I'm thinking like a 36-hour police department or fire department shift, or a
Yeah,
24-hour police department shift.
if we run out of enough people to staff, we're obviously going to have to go to an overtime environment, and I don't suspect that would be a problem.
And are discussions being made with the state in the case that something would happen where a police department went down?
No,
Without me
so
saying
there are mutual aid agreements that are in place between police departments in this area. The problem that you're going to have is we're probably not going to be any different than anyone else, unless West Dallas is the epicenter, which I don't suspect it is. If we're short, everyone's going to be short. So we're going to have to further minimize things that we do and prioritize and then respond to high priority items. Hopefully it won't get to that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Chief Mitchell? Thank you.
I can give a little input on City Hall operations. Since Monday, we've been severely limiting access. We've had people sitting at the front, approaching people as they walked in the building, finding out what they were here for, and pretty much transacting at that location for them, going back and getting their taxes paid and things like that. So we didn't have any citizens walking throughout the building. We have doors propped open. Ed is checking them every hour, so there's no fire issues. And then starting tomorrow, we're going to just be having access to the building as it pertains to any voting, absentee voting, and the rest will be pushing people online and things like that for their operations. We've had IT put a lot of work into getting a lot of staff the ability to do telework, so there's a lot of people working from home. We have a lot of work to do with absentee ballots for those people that normally would have been waiting on customers. We do have work for them to do. There's other projects that people can do. Found out recently that not every department has standard operating procedures or work instructions for people, so that's going to be a big focus for me. The people that are home, they better write those and get those done, so we can not have an issue if something would happen to them or something like that. So that's a little bit about City Hall. I was just going to go through each of the different departments, if that's okay, and then Richard was going to come up and talk a little bit about HR policy. That's okay. And as it relates to ordering over for overtime, I don't believe there's any restrictions. The only time restriction I'm familiar with would be the driving for the Public Works drivers, and let's hope there's not a snowstorm, because I don't know what we're gonna do. Yeah. The municipal court is closed, the Historical Society is closed, the dog park's gonna be closed starting tomorrow, senior center's closed like Bob said before, library is just online services and drive-through pickup. The city meetings, that's one thing wanted you to weigh in on. I believe there's only a handful of meetings between now and the next term. I think the PFC, the Plan Commission, the Library Board, and maybe 2 other committees or boards are meeting. I'm not sure if there's a desire to cancel or ask those boards to cancel, or one of the topics you were going to talk about is doing virtual meetings. So I don't know if there's any input on that. Public Works is still collecting, recycling garbage. They're practicing social distancing in the building. One of the questions we did have was, did you want them to continue to operate the drop-off facilities? They're dealing with people and their cash coming in. Right now, it looks like Oak Creek is closed, Tosa's possibly closing down, Greendale is open, but they're run by John's Recycling, so that's something we want some input on. Engineering, most of their items are done online, but if there's inspections needed, they'll be doing those in the field. Same with building inspections. So that's a little bit about the different departments here. I don't know if anyone had any input on the public works or the meetings.
From my point of view, I think we should close the drop-off site at the yards, number one. I think we can do without that for a few weeks, and people can make do at home for a while. And as far as the meetings, I guess it's up to each committee or the department that runs them. If they're not necessary to keep things moving, I think they should be canceled. If we have things, I'm thinking like, I don't know if there's anything exciting on Planning Commission or Police and Fire Commission. If they can be postponed without affecting any development or any issues with the Police and Fire Department, they probably should be postponed. If they can't, if there are things that need to be acted on, then, we should look at just minimizing the length of time at the meetings and having meetings held in here rather than 128, so that there's more room and more spacing between the people at the meeting. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Mr. President,
Alderman
I have a
Stefanski.
question real quick. Rebecca, if we close the drop-off site, those employees that are working there, are there going to be things for them to do, or are they going to get laid off?
We're not going to be laying any of the employees off.
Okay.
We have enough work for them to
Okay.
be doing. And I'm pretty much making sure that people are working when they're working from home or on other things. You can-
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Haas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And following up on your comment, I think that if we want the other committees to, out of a sense of caution, not meet, I think it's important that we as a council act out that we shouldn't give them cover, is my feeling on that. And so if, as a member, having been a member of one of those other committees in the past, if there are complaints or folks that are against it, well, then they can point to the council, and it's the council that said it. I think that would be appropriate in that situation.
Mr. President, as a member of the library board, I can say that, like, the biggest issue that came up recently for us was closing the library, and I believe a quorum responded within 2 hours to emails for it. And obviously, the library's mostly closed right now, and I would defer to Mike Kozalka, the director, but I don't think we have anything super pressing, that need to be dealt with, so.
I don't know what other meetings are scheduled. I think, Steve, is there a planning commission?
There's one next.
Is that something that is going to hold up some development if it's not held, or can it be postponed for a couple of weeks, or?
I guess I would prefer to have the Plan Commission meeting. We have some infill tenants coming to the West Dallas Town Center with some site landscaping and architectural updates. We have a Lehman Brewery at 1309 60th Street.
Can you hold a meeting in here then, and maybe have, like we're asking at other meetings, that people wait out in the parking lot until they're called in to the meeting? And so there's only the committee members, the staff member, and whoever the applicant is, and maybe a couple of interested parties, if that's...
We can do that. And in fact, our Plan Commission meetings are televised, so we could,
Yes.
we'll just have a very minimal skeleton crew within, if it is held within here or 128. Perhaps it would just be myself, the mayor, And then we would just live stream it and then have a call-in number for applicants and plan commissioners so that, you know, the bodies that need to discuss things could still do so via the call-in number.
That would be great.
Okay.
So you could have really a virtual meeting then.
Correct, yes.
Good.
And Mr. President,
Alderman May.
that was going to be my suggestion. I can't see a reason why all meetings couldn't happen virtually, as long as they're recorded and able to be placed on the website or something where people can either tune in or watch it shortly thereafter. Even our council meetings, really, we could be doing this virtually, and allow all of us to get in on calls. There are ways to do it. I'd like to see us do that as well.
I think we have to be careful with citizen members because they may not have the technology available to them at home that we do.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair? So one of the items on the agenda tonight is authorizing teleconferencing and video conferencing for not only the council, but all the committees, boards, and commissions. And so if the council wants to do that, I've drafted in a way where the chair essentially would consent to whomever or however. That is one important factor, is that the public has to be able to access it to the extent they would if there was no technology. So if the person's able to physically show up in City Hall to watch a meeting, then they should be able to do so. So that's why if someone shows up for a meeting that's teleconferenced, my advice would be to have a computer screen monitor displaying the meeting to the same extent that it would here. That way, if there's more than 10 people or we want to try to respect that rule, we can have it remotely viewed throughout the building by people without putting too many in one room.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
And Mr. President, again, yeah, I agree with Alderman Haas. I think if it's a non-essential meeting, it should be canceled. If it is an essential meeting, get as much as we can virtually. Is there any consideration that between now and April 22nd that this council may need to meet again? I'd imagine with the things changing so quickly, there may be an opportunity, and if not an opportunity for that, would there be an opportunity for us to sit in and see what's going on at City Hall in some ways?
Well, I can't speak to what's going to happen between now and April 22nd, because I would have never thought that a lot of things that happened the last week would have happened, so I guess anything's possible. So, and I did get a text from the Public Works Director. The people that were assigned to the yards would be doing asphalt, so I'm assuming that means they'll be filling potholes. So that will be something that's well needed right now. So at this time, I will turn it over to Richard to talk a little bit about the questions we have regarding HR and the decisions that we're looking for the Administration and Finance Committee to weigh in on.
Mr. Chair, before we do that?
Did everyone get a copy of email today with the suggestions on there?
Yeah.
I gave a copy to everyone as they came.
Right. I was just wondering if they received it ahead of time so they had a chance to read it over before they came to the meeting, because that was the whole idea of sending it early.
We were asked to look at HR policies to determine what actions we could take to address employees' immediate concerns, and also proactively look at what policies need to be amended to address the likelihood of health-related issues in the workforce. We think the actions taken to date with teleworking has addressed a lot of the immediate concerns, particularly with closures of daycares and schools. But we do have some recommendations to address the likelihood of isolation, quarantine, those type issues. The first recommendation would relate to paid sick leave. It's to expand the reasons that you could take paid sick leave. Currently, it's for your own illness or under FMLA for the illness of a family member. Consistent with what we're seeing in other communities and consistent with what's before the federal government, to expand the use of paid sick leave for scenarios listed there having to do with quarantine or self-isolation, whether you're seeking medical care, whether you've been ordered to be quarantined, and whether you're caring for an individual that's been quarantined or has been diagnosed with COVID-19, and also caring for your own children when your school or your daycare is unavailable because of closure. So that's the main thing there. Most employees have ample sick leave balances, particularly those under the legacy benefit. We've identified that those that would be at risk would be under the total benefit package, and so we've found a few additional minor changes we could make to kind of address that. One would be that there is a restriction on using your extended sick leave bank. This is the bank of hours that when employees roll over from the legacy to the total benefit package, there is hours set aside. You can also accrue to that annually. And whether we would open that up, currently can only be accessed under FMLA scenarios. Here we're saying that should you deplete the time off bank available to you, you can dip into that. And it doesn't need to be necessarily an FMLA issue. So we think that's something that could help address, make more hours available to total benefit package employees. Another one would be those employees could also currently go 40 hours to the negative, meaning they could borrow and pay it back. Most employees would accrue at least the rate of 20 hours a month. And so we'd double that from the 40 current hours to 80. And so over time, they could pay that back. The goal here would be to keep them in a paid status longer. And finally, they could take a voluntary unpaid time off. You can do that for 40 hours currently. And we're saying double that to 80 hours. So the goal here is to keep employees productive and in a paid status and shore up their, financial risk because of this pandemic. And so by expanding sick leave allows them to use money or time in their own bank, to tap into extended sick leave bank, to borrow, and then finally go on to voluntary unpaid status. So we think with that we could address that. Another change we're recommending would be to eliminate the eligibility restriction related to time having worked for an employer. Currently, before you can tap into your FMLA protection, currently you have to have worked for a year and have worked a certain number of hours, and then you'd be eligible for FMLA. We're saying that eliminate that restriction so you can go on FMLA immediately for COVID-19 related issues for that, so your job is protected for that. And then the final issue has to do with non-benefited employees. There are 53 of those employees. There is action on the federal level under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act that's moving that would likely address that. So we didn't make any recommendation at this time of how to address that. And then I guess finally, probably the biggest issue here is proposing travel restrictions, or at least requiring self-isolation if you do travel to certain areas identified by the CDC as, I think, either a tier 3 internationally or a geographic area with sustained community transmission. So that number of areas is growing rapidly, I would say. And we would require employees to self-isolate for 14 days after that.
Are there any questions?
Mr. President,
Alderman May.
would I properly assume that if someone took voluntary unpaid time off, we would still afford them health insurance as if they were working?
Yes, we would, we'd have to work with Finance Department of how we'd deduct that from their check. Maybe it'd be at a later date, if they're not getting a check because we've extended that period. But I think there has been scenarios where that's been done before.
And then, Mr. Chair, a question for Peggy then. Are we keeping track of all these hours in a special account? And I mean, would something like this be eligible potentially under some sort of emergency relief from the state or federal government?
So it would just depend. We're not keeping track of time off. We are keeping track. Employees are logging their time as they're working remotely, working in the building, et cetera. That likely isn't going to be covered unless if there's special funds, emergency funds, and there have been those funds talked about. But we're keeping track of all of the COVID costs. So any chances we get for reimbursements or emergency funding would certainly be in place.
And are there any actions we can take on our health insurance plan to limit our exposure to the amount per employee that will be paid? That really hit us hard last year, and had we known this was coming, we probably would have lowered those
We're
amounts.
self-insured.
I see where that's going. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? This is going to be discussed at Administration and Finance tonight and acted upon.
I'd just say these are, I guess, preliminary recommendations. The, landscape is changing rapidly. And so we think these are some proactive measures we could take, but depending upon, how hard the employee population is affected by this, there may need to be additional changes as it evolves. So these are our initial recommendations. We think that with our benefit package and the number of hours available to employees, that they're well situated to address these concerns.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman May.
It appears we've passed the 7 o'clock mark. Would it be appropriate to recess the committee of the whole and come back to discuss other matters?
After the mayor, I don't know unless there's questions.
I have questions, but...
Mayor?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really quickly want to thank everybody for what we've all gone through in the last week, I guess. I'm going to forget to mention people, but I really mean this when I say everybody. And I want to start with everybody in this room, especially Bob and Ashley from the Health Department for their help and their leadership and their guidance. I want to thank the council for their patience and their working with the constituent calls that they're getting. I want to thank the employees for their patience as well. And everybody in here has had some part to play in all of this. Everyone. I mean, it's been from managing our staffs to managing our issues to, it's such an internal and external situation where we are dealing with not only service delivery to everybody in the city, whether they live here or work here, not only everybody who works in these walls, not only everybody who's out patrolling the city 24/7, but, and Rebecca, you've been stellar. I want to thank you. And I'm sure there are more people, but I don't want to get within 6 feet of anybody. Ed, for your help taking care of managing the building and the flow of people coming through and your fire watch. Steve, with all the voting issues. Everybody here has done a really solid job on what has been extremely stressful on all of us, internally and externally. So I just really want to, I was going to do this during my mayor's report, but I just wanted to do this right now and give honestly heartfelt thanks to everybody who has stepped up in this time.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, Mr. President?
Alderman May.
Can we ask additional questions now, or should we recess and come back and ask those questions then, or?
Well, I think as long as we're on the subject, we may as well continue with, I don't know how many more questions there are, and I know some of it's going to be handled in Finance Committee too.
Yeah.
So, I guess my only question to Rebecca is, are we going to do the closed item sessions that were on the agenda tonight, or are we going to postpone them for a later date?
I believe Kale said we can postpone them for
They
a
can be
later date.
postponed. Okay,
Yeah.
so we don't have to worry about the closed session items. We won't be talking about them.
Yep. Mr. Chair?
Alderman May.
My question has more to do with the emergency powers of the mayor, and I'm very happy that those were called upon. And my understanding is when those occur, the council then, when it comes together, can confirm or reaffirm or deny some of those actions. And so far, all actions have been absolutely wonderful. But in the days ahead, things are rapidly changing. There may be, after we take action tonight, the need for additional emergency action on behalf of the mayor. This council is likely going to want to come together and reaffirm the mayor, show our support. Is there a plan to have a meeting once a week with the council? Are we going to do this every 2 weeks, or is this just it till April 22nd? That's over 36 days away. I believe the mayor's on the right track, he's doing everything right, but I think it would help to have the council's understanding and backing going forward.
They would not be regular meetings. Only one regular meeting would have been scheduled anyway, but there are.
Special meetings.
There are provisions to call special meetings as necessary. By statute, the mayor does retain the same authority that he exercised on Saturday to do so any time between now and the 22nd, with the council then being able to call a special meeting as soon as it can meet to either ratify, amend, or repeal the mayor's order. So while there's nothing on the schedule right now, special meetings are certainly a possibility if necessary.
And then my only concern is it's just keeping us all informed of what's going on. And I know everyone is so busy. I mean, when you try calling someone, you don't get a call back. We're so used to the quick service. It's taking time because you're all working very hard. But I just want to make sure those lines of communication are kept open so that we all, 10 of us, know what's going on.
Alderman May, I can attest to the fact that staff was meeting Saturday for most of the day, Sunday. They were extremely busy trying to get facts, information. The situation was changing rapidly, and information was changing. There were meetings, conference meetings with the county health services. I know Bob has had meetings with the state health, county health, his peers in the ITT, or ICC. So it's everyone has been very, very busy doing things. And I know that now that the health commissioner and the governor have made some decisions, and I want to make that clear, some of the decisions are not within our power, and I think maybe Attorney Decker could address some of that. Some of the decisions that are made are in the realm of the health commissioner rather than the mayor and the council.
Sure. So the way it works right now is there's basically dual jurisdiction within West Dallas. Bob is a local health officer, health commissioner we call him, but that's one layer of authority. But the governor has general authority over every community in the state. So whoever has essentially the most restrictive order is what's going to apply. So I'm happy to answer questions on that if there are any.
Well, I guess if the health commissioner makes an order during this time, we don't have the authority to override him anyway, correct?
Correct. So by
Right.
statute, either one can make the order without any approval of a
Right.
governing body. It's very broad authority. So that's another way in which orders are issued.
Mr. President.
Alderman Stefanski.
I have to agree with Alderman May. I think we need to be kept in the loop better than we have been. And I also did have something that came up today with some business owners who questioned the fact that we had a 2 p.m. deadline and the state was requiring 5. So there were some people who complied with it and lost business for 3 hours while others didn't. So I think that was something that needed to be communicated better and handled in a different way. So.
Alderman Stefanski, I totally agree. I had complaints, I'm sure we've all had complaints from business owners. It was extremely short notice, and the fact that it was St. Patrick's Day, a number of people bought extra quantities of food and had it on hand, some in being cooked already, and to be told that they had to close their doors at 2 o'clock was quite a shock to a number of people. And, it was disappointing that they couldn't have had a little more notice. I, too, would have liked to seen the governor say, hey, it closes at midnight tonight, or something like that, to give business owners an opportunity to even be aware of it. Some weren't even aware at 2 o'clock that there was supposed to be a closing, because they didn't have the news on. So I agree, there has to be more communication in that area. And I think that now that things have calmed down a little bit, not totally, but a little bit for staff, I think there's a little more time for communication. And I think the mayor has done a good job of putting out some information every day on the website and with an update letter to the citizens as to what was going on, even though many times by the time he put it out, it was already changing.
Mr. President, I'm just going to
Alderman
kind of
Marzak.
comment on it also. And I also appreciate what Rebecca was putting out, because the mayor puts them out, and then Rebecca immediately puts them out, which helped considerably. There was a lot of confusion, and I'll agree with yesterday, because Milwaukee shut theirs down at midnight. So I'm getting a call at 1 in the morning and saying, can we open up? tomorrow, and I'm like, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
That's exactly
So
right.
I
Had
think
that this
it's-
morning.
Every municipality was handling something different, and, you know, the only thing I knew was what we did, and then the governor overruled that, and I think there was just this big ball of confusion. However, I really do think that between the mayor and Rebecca, I believe, did a very good job getting the information, I know to me, and on the emails that I needed. It might not have been as fast as I might have wanted it, but I'm talking an hour or two delay where I was able to get back to, you know, the parties involved. So, yes, love to see it sooner, and maybe somebody is like designated to keep us hourly updated or every other hour. But again, Rebecca, thank you, and the mayor, you guys.
I just
I
wanted
think
to
they did a
make
nice
a
job.
comment that our communications department has done a lot to help us get that out. So it's not just the mayor and I
Right.
doing that.
Is there anything else to come before the committee then?
So, Mr. Chair, one last thing. The issues, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to mention a quick point of clarity on last night's ICC meeting. We received notice very late that they were meeting, and basically, every community that was on that call, which was not all 19 of us, was being asked to make a decision that we were not empowered to make. It was our health commissioner's decision. So as they were going through the list, the North Shore all fell into line, and that was, I believe, 7 of the 11 communities that were intact last night at 2 a.m. And then this morning was the 9 a.m. call with the health commissioners, and that's where Bob did a good job corroborating, collaborating with, it was Oak Creek, Greenfield, Wauwatosa, Hales Corners, and us. I think that was the 5. So it was really dropped on us in a way where I wasn't comfortable making that decision on the spot like that. And I know a few of us have talked because you had called and we've been phone taking and such, but that's kind of how that all went down, and that's why there was so much confusion this morning and so many people calling the clerk's office and calling us, and so that's kind of how that all shook out.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman May?
Yeah, so my question, Mr. President, is are there policy decisions that have to be made soon? The employee thing with sick and all that, that's not on our agenda this evening. You're going to need decisions on this quickly for our employees.
It's on the agenda.
Which number?
Yeah, it's on there.
Number 25.
Okay, thank you.
As far as are there going to be decisions, likely there will be, but we don't know what those are at this time. We tried to look as forward as we could with that. You'll notice there's one clause in there that gives a little bit of authority that you might want to pay attention to. I believe it says something that the mayor and/or myself are given the authority to make changes relating to the personnel and service delivery, and after we notify the council of those changes. So that will be something that you would have to decide whether you want to do, or if you want to come together and discuss those. So there is, I'm sure, there's some policy decisions that should lie with the council, and then there's some administrative things that are just going to come up as we implement. A lot of it's going to have to do with the personnel things, the time off and things like that that are going to come up. So it's just a matter of how comfortable you are with those different aspects of decisions that are going to have to be made, because the higher level decisions are going to be made probably by the health commissioner and the governor and things like that. That will be out of the council's hands, but we'll do our best to let you know those in a timely manner. We want to make sure we're accurate with the information. We don't want to put out something that is inaccurate where everyone in the whole county is confused about whether they're in or out. So sometimes that takes a little bit of time.
So what you're saying is, if there's a need for a meeting, we're going to have a meeting.
Right.
That answers the question.
That, I just want to make sure that,
Sure,
that you
yes.
get everything you need and the mayor has whatever comfort he needs from us, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Is there anything else to come before the committee then?
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.